One, two, three. You are listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs podcast with me, Giles Bidder, and I'm extremely excited to have John Darnielle, author, lyricist, songwriter in The Mountain Goats. I don't know why his people let me speak to him, but I spoke to him on the day of the release of Getting Into Knives, The Mountain Goats' new record, which is out now. The song behind this is from it. It's called Picture of My Dress, and I love it. I hope if you're listening, you enjoy this podcast. I'm fully aware that there are some people who absolutely love this band, and I like to think I know how lucky I am getting to chat to John. So, cheers. Thank you for listening. As always, if you enjoy it, please rate and review and subscribe and tell your friends on your WhatsApps and all that. That's the thing that gives this show legs. I really appreciate you listening to this. East London's Signature Brew have been brewing music-inspired beers since 2011. You may know them from collaborating with Mastodon and Idols and Slaves and recently Sports Team. You can go and order those off their website, signaturebrew.co.uk, and using the voucher code 101podcast at checkout for a 10% discount. All right, here is John Darnielle of The Mountain Goats. Go well. Cheers.
I take a picture of my dress.
Obviously, today is release day. Thank you so much for chatting to me. It's a busy, busy day.
Oh, it's a great day. I mean, it's a good day to be talking about the Mountain Goats for me.
And you've released, a lot of records. It doesn't really need to be said, but, you still get the same thrill. You still have this same buzz.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's release day. I mean, it's not as super intense as it used to be. It used to be like going through the bottleneck to release day was seriously just, the tension would get very, very high. This is not as intense as it used to be, but it's still extremely exciting. You wake up and you go, oh, everybody gets to hear the record today. So
is that because of DSPs? Hence, if I can use that acronym, is that because of Spotify and iTunes that it's not so stressful?
No, I mean, I just think it's actually how long I've been doing it. That part used to be super stressful. That I stream music all the time, but I grew up with records. You sort of, when you're making records, you have an idea that you want people to be holding it in their hands and hearing the big sound files instead of the heavy compressed ones and so forth. I'm kind of over most of that, but yeah, I do think the fact that albums leak, sometimes it can be a little bit of a relief. This one didn't, as far as I know, and I follow pretty closely. Whereas Tallahassee leaked it was 2002, it leaked 6 months early. It was very depressing,
Wow.
but I do think the fact that that you're more in tune with the chatter about the record than you used to be does relieve a little of the tension. But I think it's mainly just that I've been doing it for a long time.
So, I mean, mentioning Tallahassee, this podcast is about, it's about really an idea that I thought when my old band was touring so much, I used to come home from tour and think, what am I doing? And I realized a lot of my friends were in the same positions. They'd come off tour and feel, just kind of, just a sort of smorgasbord of emotions.
Yeah, it's the home from tour feeling is one of those feelings that people who haven't done it, it's very hard to convey what it feels like, because it is, you say it's a smorgasbord, it really totally is. If you had a good tour, you feel so accomplished and great, but at the same time, you notice how unmoored you were the entire time. And it's a very intense feeling. Yeah. And
when it's not your full-time job, when you can't make a full-time wage, whatever that may be, wherever you live, whatever your circumstances are. I mean, how do you go about reconciling that with the fact that you have this art that you need to create and to tour?
So I worked a day job for as long as I could, because I like working a day job. I like, especially if you live in the U.S., if you decide you're going to strike it out on your own wages, then you won't have health insurance, right? So it's a pretty heavy thing to do. So I kept my day job for the longest time. And for me, it's always good to be doing other work, because I think there's this positioning of creative work as something other than labor, but it is labor, right? And so if I'm doing other stuff, I feel my mind is wandering here, but oh man, I lost track of the actual jumping off point there.
Well, you did hit a nice note, which
can you cue me the question?
Yeah, it's just, how does one reconcile having this labor of art, with, and that being something that doesn't exactly make a ton of money, especially in the earlier years. How do you, figure out that contrast between doing that and then having a job at home, which is obviously you're putting a risk by doing your art in the first place?
So one reason the Mountain Goats didn't tour as much or as early as most of our peers is I was a little older, so I already had jobs and bills to pay, and I had a hard and fast rule that I'm not leaving home if I'm going to come home poorer than I left. I couldn't do that.
Good rule.
I just couldn't afford to. So I always, for me, the work equation was always part of it. Like I would set an amount of money, and it wasn't a big amount of money, but I had to make a little bit or I couldn't go. And so that was always the case for me. The thing that's funny about coming back is like music work, any work in the arts, sort of gives you more ego gratification than most day jobs do, right? You stand in front of people playing music, and then they clap. It's the craziest thing. It's like, wow, it's this amazing feeling. In your normal job, nobody claps for you, and that's healthy, right? That's good. You don't deserve, you're just doing your job. You don't deserve to be applauded for that, right? And whereas in music, it's just natural to do that, and it's really cool. But it's also quite, I always feel like performing is maybe not the healthiest thing for a human being to do, though a lot of us have the need, right? So when you come back to the day job from that, it often is very good for you, right? Because for 2 weeks, people have been telling you how great you are. Well, you're not great. You're actually just writing music and playing it, but people get excited and tell you you're really good. And then you come back to your day job and you're another person on the line, right? And I think that's healthy and good.
Yeah, and I wonder if those day jobs for you, and every musician, I suppose, whether that has that kind of certain element that you might have the producer when you're making a record might say, let's go out of your comfort zone. Whereas to work those jobs in real life, sometimes that is going out your comfort zone.
No, that's right. The thing is, when we distinguish between the arts and other types of work, I think we sort of do ourselves no favors, even though we do know, like, there is something very special about music and about books, about movies, about theater, about dance. It occupies a special place, but it is still work, right? It's the same thing. It just satisfies you in a different way. The work of a cook satisfies you in incredible ways, right?
Absolutely.
That also should sort of be afforded a different sort of status. But this is a very interesting turn of the conversation. So again, I'm sorry, my mind is wandering so badly.
No, this is the podcast. This is the podcast to let your mind wander. But I was just about to say, you're gonna find stories, especially in a lyricist such as yourself. You're gonna find stories from your day job.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. So unusual for me in my old day job in that I was a nurse, right? So patient confidentiality has something to do with that. Like I can't really work those stories in except in a really general way. You don't want to be telling somebody's story who's locked up in a hospital. That's not cool. But at the same time, the story that people get locked up, obviously that's a story I have told, right? That in the death metal band in Denton song, right? And there's all kinds of inspiration that comes to you. I think from any day job though, because I wrote The Coroner's Gambit, a 1999 album I made, while I was working on a grain elevator, right, in Iowa. So that's where the people bring soybeans and corn in who've been growing it, and they store them in the elevator. The elevator sends it out to market from there. It's called a co-op, a cooperative grain exchange. Super. Where you're at, this would be like, I guess, where's the granaries there? Out west. So I was working there. I was writing my lyrics on lunch break in this tiny office inside the grain elevator, and that was pretty hip. It's like, because it's then that if you're a writer, that's when you sort of are getting your escape from your day job. But also, I'm inspired by practically everything. It's very hard to put me in a place where I'm not going to draw some inspiration. And standing on the roof of a grain elevator when it's starting to get cold in Iowa, and checking you drop a tape measure down. Probably they do all this electronically now, but this was the late '90s. You drop a tape measure down the top of the elevator to see how much space is left in a given bin for dumping grain, right? And it's a pretty, cool space to be in. You get a lot of ideas.
Yeah. And would you say that people would were you quite a good worker? Were you quite a hard worker when it came down to that job in particular, and others such as, being a nurse, you kind of have to be very disciplined.
So I am a hard worker and I'm a good nurse. I was bad at the harvest help job. I was really not cut out for that kind of work. But the thing is, like, the grain elevator was at that time 4 blocks from my house. We lived in a very small town. And I saw the ad for harvest help, and I was working part-time in my nursing job. I was like, okay, find out whether you can do this. And I was able to do it. But that's really exhausting physical labor. And the guys who like to do it are guys who genuinely enjoy it. You know, they look forward to it. When the harvest starts to kick up, you know, they get really excited, and you can feel it. They get like ball players getting ready to go out on the pitch, you know, but whereas I would be like, see the truck start to roll in loaded with grain, it's like, I'm going to have a long day today. So yeah, I remember my boss, when in December, it was starting to get really cold, right? And, in Iowa, it gets super cold, and I'm still up on the roof of these buildings, and I was like, I don't think I can do this, and I said, hey Jim, I think maybe after next week, I worked the harvest time. He said, yeah, I had a feeling you were getting short, which is a phrase I liked.
I mean, I read somewhere that the Mountain Goats became a full-time thing for you in 2004. Is that right?
Yeah, that was when. So we moved from Iowa to North Carolina, and when we did that, I wrapped up my job as a nurse with children in Iowa, and we came out here, and I thought, well, look, I'm actually doing pretty good at this job. I'd just been on an Australian tour, and I'd come home with a good paycheck. So I thought I would give it a shot, and then I thought if it doesn't work out, I'll either find nursing, or maybe it'll be time for me to do something else. And I actually, so for the first year, that would have been 2004. And it was fairly lean times. Me and Peter toured a lot that year, because that's what you do, is like you just stay out, you know. And so we toured a lot, and I was able to pay my bills. But when the Sunset Tree came out in 2005, it felt like I was never going to actually be able to make a proper living at it. My wife had a real job as a scientist, so I volunteered at an animal shelter, and my idea was, I'll do this, and then I'll apply for a job when one opens up. And that's what I was doing in the spring of 2005 when the Sunset Tree came out. And that was sort of, then I have been the Mountain Goats full time ever since.
Wow. And so do you feel like, I mean, thinking back to that kind of time, did you feel like there was something that you had to do every time you got home? Like work at the animal charity, the animal shelter?
The main thing I would do is cook. I try and go directly to the kitchen, which the thing is, once you have kids, it relieves you of this need to like re-anchor yourself in the home. Cause it's so weird. Well, you said you toured, right? It's like you get home and you have had a lot of different homes over the last few weeks, hotel rooms, other people's houses, vans, and when you get home, your body is like trying to send you this message that all spaces are temporary or something, And what I do is I go directly to the kitchen and start cooking, right? Or I used to do that. But now when you get home, the kids don't even know, like they know you were gone, but they will put you in your job as dad directly, immediately, right? And you will have no confusion about it. You will be off tour very quickly.
Did you feel like you had a pretty solid identity as to who you were and, what you were trying to do with that time? And I suppose when I asked that question, I'm thinking, did you have many friends? I mean, obviously you're quite good. You're friends with Superchunk. Were you friends around that period of time? And were you kind of, peers to each other in the way that you wanted to do things yourself?
Well, so friends and peers are different questions for me. I don't really hang out much. I mean, I do have some pals, but I'm a homebody. I stay home. I like to work a lot, and I hang out with my family. And it's kind of like pulling teeth to get me to go hang out. And I'll have a good time if I go, But I mean, I'm talking obviously pre-quarantine. I barely left the house except for exercise since March, right? But yeah, so I know all those people, and I would see them at like the Christmas party. I'll go to the Christmas party,
Yeah.
But other than that, I really people don't believe how hard it is to get me to go out and do stuff, but it's pretty hard. And not that I won't enjoy it. It's just that I also enjoy stuff at home, and I'm often working or reading, actually getting into Magic the Gathering has gotten me to go out on Friday nights.
Oh, wow.
That's when everybody meets up to play paper Magic. And I in the past couple of years, I've gotten hugely into Magic. and so now I go out on Friday nights and I hang out with a bunch of other people who are about exactly at the same level of comfort socializing as me. You know what I mean?
Brilliant.
and play cards. And it's really awesome. And I've done that on tour. A few people have brought cards. This guy Tom Tuck brought cards to the show in London. Totally fun times.
Excellent. Excellent. In those early 2000 years, did you have an idea of what you were working towards, or you were just working? You had your head down.
So artistically, I'm always focused on what I'm doing. I never think about like, what do I want my reputation to be at the end of my life or anything like that, or what's the broader body of work I'm building. I'm always just thinking of what's directly in front of me, right? And that's what I like to do. I like to stay focused on the work in front of me. In terms of career, I've always I come from indie rock, and so I sort of I've always tried most of my life to not be thinking about my career,
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of unhealthy. It's an unhealthy indie rock impulse, but it's how I am. But it remains true. I'm a 90s indie rock guy. I've always tried not to think too much about the business aspects of it any more than I have to. Now, I've been doing it for 20 years. Eventually, you do start to think about business a lot. It's like it becomes where you're at, But for the most part, it's like I have a childish sense of things. I want to be just thinking about making art and not thinking about the other aspects of it, because they're not that interesting to me. It's like, what's interesting to me is singing songs, playing shows, making records. And I have a manager now. We didn't hire a manager until very late into our career. But having a person whose job it is to think about the business stuff is one of the greatest things, because then I can think about it if I need to, or if there's something interesting, but I don't have to, right? I have somebody else who that can be their job,
Yeah,
so.
and I wonder if, you talk about that habit of indie rock bands. You kind of do read and see how it, it can lead to not focusing on that business side of it, can lead to, a hard place maybe sometimes, because ultimately, at the beginning of your career, no one's going to care about it more than you, right? So it makes sense that you are in control of where you're going, on that side, on that financial side or managerial side, whatever you want to call it.
If you don't care about it, nobody will. In those, I think we have a time lag. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm interrupting. But like, I think in those years, if you don't care about your career, nobody else is going to care about your career. You'd be taken advantage of, and stuff like that. But yeah, it's like, even then, like, for the longest time, the way that we did the tour money was I would keep it all in my backpack, and until the end of the tour, and then I would come home. And I forget, Peter did this every night. Peter would go home with the money and then divide it up in cash and do a bunch of math, and we would split it in half, right? But we did this for years when other bands had bank accounts and stuff like that. And we were like keeping our coins in a sock,
Yeah.
Sort of, the Mountain Goats have always never been in a hurry to become too professional.
Did that ever worry you at times? Were there any like sort of moments where you thought, oh shit, we should have done something more legit?
Oh yeah, no, especially like, the thing that's funny is, like, if a tour is going well, then you wind up with a big sock full of coins, right?
Yeah.
And then you think, well, I'm not staying in the greatest hotels in the world right now. I'm staying at dodgy places by the side of the road. And I remember sleeping with my backpack in the bed next to me, right, looped around my ankle just in case it goes missing. Right? So that was the thing about that is, like, that. I mean, that's how bands are still doing it like that. Sleeping in the van, somebody has to sleep on top of the paycheck.
Did you have any times when writing or working for band output didn't come so naturally, and it was a bit maybe a bit harder, where it didn't flow so well, where you thought maybe how long could I carry this on for? Has that ever happened to you?
So that happens on bad tours is when that happens for me. And it's been a while, but like, I had a tour where my physical health went to hell, and then my mental health followed. And I remember on that tour thinking, there's no way, if I was working a regular job, I'd be able to call in sick. And you can't, as a musician, you don't get to call in sick. That's not part of your program, right? And so yeah, that was a tour in 2011 or 12. No, 9 or 10, I think, that Peter always remembers that I was downloading applications for nursing schools.
Yeah, and so but nothing came of that.
No, I downloaded the applications and I thought about it, and I mean, again, I came home and recuperated. This is sort of what you get the sense after a certain time making music that this is sort of what you're supposed to do, what your fate was or whatever. I mean, I don't believe in fate in that way, but you do get that feeling that this is what you were meant to do. It's what you were best at, and it is what I'm best at. This is what I do well. I'm a good nurse, but I think I'm a better musician.
Your job must have changed so much over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, well, last 5 years about fairly consistent. I mean, we're better known than we used to be. So and we changed management, and like here's one thing. This is probably not super interesting to people, but so we toured in a van for much longer than most bands of our sort of size, because in part because I come to this from a day job way of thinking. So I'm not in a hurry to spend a lot of extra money. It's like I'm trying to keep everything we make. And so we stayed in the van and stayed in hotels. And then at some point I had management show me, like, here's what you will save if you guys rent a bus instead. Going from the van to the bus is kind of a leap. And as I said earlier, the Mountain Goats have always been extremely slow to make any extra leaps, right? It's like I'm very much a measure twice, cut once person. And so we got on the bus about, our first one was, we toured with Khaki King, but we started getting our own bus, I think 2017, right? That changes everything about the way you tour, right? Now you are living in the thing that carries you around, right? And now you travel by night instead of sleeping in a bed. It's very disorienting and different. So that's one thing that's changed a lot. I mean, the bus changes everything. I sleep terribly on the bus, and I kind of hate it. Everybody else in the band loves the bus. Very fond of it. I can't stand it. I sleep really badly, but I make it work. That's been a big change. It just sort of changes the way you see the country. You wake up in a different city instead of going to sleep in the city where you played. That's kind of disorienting. So
can you ride on the bus?
There's a lot. Oh yeah, I can ride on the bus. I can. The past, like starting in 2004, but really a lot since about 2017, I can ride pretty much anywhere. That's kind of what I do. Is ride in dressing rooms, ride on the bus, ride in the studio. I ride everywhere these days.
And that's a skill in itself, isn't it? To find yourself, to give yourself the mental headspace for that.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know if it's a skill as like just a thing that you sort of you learn to do out of necessity. It's like you have a song idea, and if you write down your song ideas and then wait to bring them home, maybe you remember them and maybe you don't. But I just started doing them. The other thing that people don't talk about on tour, I mean, big rock stars have written a lot of songs about touring, and they do talk a little about this. Like, there's a lot of boredom associated with it. It's like there's a lot of downtime, right? And you can like go exploring and stuff, but you do need to save your energy for your actual job, the one people are paying you to do, which is to play music, right? So you can't really be running around all day long and then have a whole lot left in the tank for when you play that night, right? So writing is one thing you can do, right? You can, and for me, the smarter I tour, the more I'm reading and writing instead of going around doing stuff. Now that I run, running is a big thing for me now. And now that I run, I have fairly full days on tour. I wake up, make breakfast, go for my run, and I can come back and read for a long time, and eventually, load into the club mid-afternoon. And we do a lot of long sound checks now too, where we improvise and just play music together, which is a lot of fun.
That's interesting because I mean that is your job, right? To be writing and to rehearsing, I suppose, and writing during your sound check.
So let me jump in there because what you were talking about before is like when you're leaving your day job to do it and you go on tour, you sort of feel like I don't want to be doing extra work on tour. I'm having fun, right? And once you really acclimate to it as a full-time job. And so when you're on tour, you're kind of on the clock 24 hours a day. But that's kind of cool actually, because the longer you stay connected to your muse or whatever, the more you can get out of it if you're able to sort of sustain that pitch. It's funny because I think most bands discover this very early on that like, oh yeah, jamming a sound check is fun. Well, we found this out about 3 years ago, but now we really enjoy it, and just play for a while maybe play joke songs that piss off our sound man.
Brilliant. When you're running, do you listen to music? Do you listen to podcasts or audiobooks?
Yes, I have a pair of Jabra Elite Sport headphones. I'm always threatening to get a pair of Sonys instead, but the Jabras are kind of the most common, Do you run?
No, I hate it. I can't do it.
You don't. So here's the thing. I preach about it a lot these days because like it's not like I started running because I liked running. Who starts running because they like running? Freaks of nature, right? Who actually naturally wants to do that? Nobody, right? But I was really not in love with the shape of my body as I neared middle age. And I started trying, my wife ran a program that got up to 5 kilometers after she became a mom, right? And she did it. I started that program once and then I quit, and I started again and I quit. But I did start to get to the point where once in a while I do a run and I go, it felt kind of good. That was all right. I can kind of see the point of this. And last fall, so I guess this would be after about 2 years of trying and failing, falling back down. Last fall, it finally got its hooks into me. And it's when I got up to about the 20-minute mark, 20 minutes continuous running, right? That suddenly when you finish, you go, oh, that was absolutely worth it. And you notice that it's only the first 10 minutes. And not to this day, I ran half an hour yesterday. First 10 minutes, they sucked. I hated it, right? I was like, oh, God, I'm tired. I waited too long to go on this run. It's late in the afternoon. It's kind of hot, But you get free at some point. And music, as you were asking, if you have these earbuds in, I make a mix every time. I do some podcasts now and again. Yesterday, I listened to an entire album. I listened to the new Blaze of Sorrow album, which is an Italian metal band. It's really good. But usually I make a mix every day. And now that my runs are about 2.5 hours long, when they get up to the long one, it's like it can be a glorious mix with like a proper, like if you ever been out dancing past 2 a.m., the DJ will like drop in a good 14 or 15 minute piece, like something that goes really deep and everybody feels it, and it's sort of like the set has a center. You do that. My center can be like sometimes like a Steve Reich piece, like a minimalist piece, like a 4 organs, or what other minimalist stuff was I listening to? Keith Jarrett, not minimalist, but the pianist. If you put a good Keith Jarrett piece in at the peak, it can be great. And making those mixes, like this is a big part of my creative effort now, and it's only for me, so it's very indulgent, So that's what. And running on tour also has changed tour for me so much for the better because, like, one, it prevents you from partying too hard. If you're going to wake up with a hangover, but you're committed to your run, then you're going to have a miserable run. So I kind of, wind up partying less and exercising more like a middle-aged dude. It feels really good.
It's so interesting you say about, the dancing at 2 a.m. thing, because I've done it a few times where, you do stay up really late dancing and the time just flies. Whereas there'll be another night where it gets to, 10 and it's like, oh, I cannot do this. I can't stay out past midnight. And that is interesting. That makes me want to run a little bit more.
So the thing is, it really does. I mean, I'm always preaching about this. It takes a long time to get to this place I'm talking about. And it's not a fun time. Like I can look at, because the apps that you use on your phone to do it save your runs and they save geographically where I can look at the ones like, oh my God, that was miserable. I hated that, but when you do hit the point, especially if you're a music fiend, and that's the thing, it's like, because you can't be looking at your phone when you're running. I mean, you can try, I see people doing it, but generally speaking, you're going to have your phone in your pocket or in an exercise belt. So it's just you and the music, and that's such a rare condition for us now. When I was younger, if you got a new record, you generally speaking put it on the stereo and you sat back on the couch or in your bed, closed your eyes and enjoyed. And now we almost all, me too, I'm not standing in judgment here. We're all in the same boat. When we listen to new music, we're usually looking at a screen and we're clicking around through news and we're hate scrolling on Twitter and we're doing a million things. And you really have to practice discipline to just engage the music without these other distractions. When you run, and this would be true if you were on a bicycle too, by the way, I have friends who bike instead and who have one in England who does like these 56-mile runs, insanely great bike rides. But when you do it, it's just you and the music and your body. It's just like dancing, right? Except you're running, so it's a little harder than dancing, right? It's like, and there's nobody hands you a gin and tonic at any point. But you get to indulge in music, and when you hit that connection during the run, I mean, it really does feel like the greatest moments you've had on the dance floor. It's like, oh, the music and my body and the things that I'm seeing, if you've picked a good place to run that's got a lot of greenery and stuff, it's pretty magic.
What you say about not, and I love that, hate scrolling on Twitter, it's, something that we have to learn, a lot of us have to learn, Generation Z, I suppose, are either better off for it or worse for it than us. I'm not sure. But, finding a way to not just look at our screens all the time. I think that is something that probably, history is going to tell us we all should learn to do right now.
It's just so hard. It's like, we can't beat ourselves up too hard about it, because it's like the dopamine hit that you get from it is real, right? Social media, like most people prior to Twitter and Facebook, I think, would go through phases of like, oh, I was up all night browsing the web and I didn't really do anything. But because there were no likes, right, and retweets and stuff, the dopamine hit from it wasn't as big, right? Whereas now, you say something and somebody tells you you're funny, and we were talking about applause earlier. It's like, you got applause. It's not healthy. Now you want more, right? Now you got to have a little bit more, right? And you got to, and plus getting into arguments, human beings love to argue, and social media is a place where you can tell a stranger that you disagree.
Right.
Whereas otherwise at 2 a.m., the pub tells you you've had enough. Go home. You have to stop arguing with people about stuff, right?
Yeah.
And on social media, that time never comes.
And you have time to reflect.
Yeah, I agree with you strongly. Yeah, exactly. You have time, and you're looking at other people's faces as they react. You get so much better information from a person's face if you're disagreeing with them than you do from stuff they type, because, it's very, and those of us who've been online a long time, this happened on Usenet a lot too. I don't know how old you are, but like there was a thing called Usenet in the early days of the internet, which was just a place where you made a post that was distributed via mailing list usually, your email would get a digest every day of all these arguments that you could then, discussions you could participate in. But they would get very, very heated and very long, like incredibly long essays of disagreement. And you can see it's like, oh man, for people who like to argue, the internet is absolutely the destination.
That's it.
You're going to fall down. I don't want you to fall down. I'm going to do my thing. Oh, yeah, I was just sorry. I'm pushing my 5-year-old in a swing, and I had a terrifying moment mid-line where it looked like he's insisting on standing up in the swing, and he lost his balance. I was like, oh my God, is my dude going to plant his face in the leaves as I'm talking?
Oh wow! Oh my God! Wow! Is that something that it must be kind of scary at moments being a parent, right?
Oh yeah, it is. I'll say there's this one thing about lockdown that, it's to say, oh no, it's good because this is wrong. But the amount of time I have gotten to spend with my 5-year-old Moses here over the past 7 months is incredible, because I wasn't going to get this time. I was going to be on the bus. Now I was going to be living an incredible life on the bus. And more importantly, I was going to be able to ply my trade and draw a paycheck, which I'm not doing. Right. But he's only going to be 5 once, and this is our last child, right? So I have gotten to spend 7 months in the company of this dude, and he's amazing, right? And it's been a real blessing. It's also exhausting. Normally, you don't parent this much. Normally, you can share it with teachers and stuff, and instead, it's like it's mom and dad from 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. And it's intense, but it does remind you, is like, oh, and this is why we used to live in villages and stay near our families, so that other people could help with the load. One unforeseen blessing in all this has been the time I've been able to spend with Moses here, because like he's not going to be 5 again. This time will never come again. And he was going to, like, today I would be in Washington, D.C., that we were going to open our tour in D.C. tonight, and that's not happening. So it sucks that it's not happening and that I can't draw a paycheck, but it rules that I'm pushing my son and talking to you. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Great to hear. Thank you so much for joining me. We're slightly running out of time here, but I just wanted to ask about, 2 albums this year. How do you think you'll look back on getting into Knives and creating it and putting it out? How do you think you'll look back on this period of time?
So I mean, just because of the pandemic, it will obviously be a pretty unique moment in my life and in the catalog, but especially given, like, we recorded this thing March 1st through 7th of this year. Right. The coronavirus had landed on these shores a couple weeks before. There had been a little bit of talk about it when I'd played in San Francisco just a couple weeks before. Right. But it was not, people were expressing a little bit of concern. Right. And as we recorded in the studio, the news started to hit that, like, in Italy, the numbers were getting pretty gnarly, right? In China, it was real gnarly. And I started to get the feeling, like, I was like, God, what if something happens and we can't tour? Because we had, our whole year was planned out. We're going to record this album. We're going to release it in October, and we will tour. And the whole tour was routed. Everything was planned. But by the time we emerged, it was very clear to me things are changing. And a week later, it was clear to everybody, because a week later they closed the schools, right? And I was like, oh, we're not going to tour. There's no way. And our spring tour was canceled, and my summer tour was canceled. The album is like a memory of a very blissful time with my band. Right. For us, it's like, no, that's when it was just us in the studio, focusing on getting the work done and having a really good time, before people couldn't really hang out together without wearing masks. It's like, so for me, this album will always occupy that spot,
Excellent. John, it's been a total pleasure.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed talking to you. I sorry if I seem a little scattered. It's a very intense day for me.
No, great to hear it. What's for the next few hours for you? What are you doing this evening to celebrate?
Well, let's see. I have a run, so I'm very excited to go on my run. And I'm figuring out what to cook. As I say, that's sort of my happy place. I promised my son I'd take him to the park, so I'm going to do that. And I usually listen to music to celebrate. That's sort of my observance of stuff, is to treat myself to some stuff. And there's a new Clipping album out also today, and it's an amazing record.
I haven't heard of that.
Really, really, really good. So I'm going to listen to that a lot. They're a rap band, but they do sort of horror soundtrack sort of sounding rap. Incredibly good. Clipping is super special. Very worth looking into.
Excellent. Good tip. John, thank you so much.
A real pleasure talking to you, man.
Awesome.
I got to believe we're going to be back over there, and I hope to see you when we do.
Absolutely. Can't wait for it.
Cool. Take good care.
You too. So that was John Darnielle of the Mountain Goats. If you haven't heard Getting Into Knives, go and do that right now. And please share this podcast. Recommendations are the best thing you can do for this show. Cheers. Here's Sparrer.
I've been working all day for me mate on the side, running around like a blue-ass fly. I've been working all day for me mate. Every bleeding minute I've been on the go, up and down the ladder like a fiddler's elbow. I've been working all day for me mate.
This is a Mighty Moon Media podcast.